Everyone, it is 6 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the City of Tucson Planning Commission. My name is Lexi Wella, and I am the chair of the Planning Commission. The responsibilities of this body are to advise the mayor and council and the Planning and Development Services Department on the adoption of long-range plans, policies, specific plans, and regulations that affect land use and development. Will staff call the roll, please?
Yes, Chair Willett.
Present.
Commissioner Martin.
Present.
Commissioner Gast.
Present.
Commissioner Cassidy.
Here.
Commissioner McBride Olson, absent. Commissioner Pafford.
Here.
Commissioner Young, absent. Commissioner Ortiz-Pino.
Here.
Commissioner Lucia.
Here.
And Commissioner Schwartz.
Oh, here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Excellent. Can staff introduce the next item, please? Or I guess that's me, sorry. The approval of minutes and legal action. Can I please entertain a motion for the approval of those?
So moved.
Seconded.
Perfect. We have a motion and it's a second. Are there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of recommending this item, say yay.
Yay.
Yay. Aye. Yay.
All those opposed, say nay. Hearing no nays there, can I get a roll call, please?
Chair Willett.
Aye.
Commissioner Gast.
Aye.
Commissioner Cassidy.
Aye.
Commissioner McBride Olson, absent. Commissioner Pafford.
Aye.
Commissioner Young, absent. Commissioner Ortiz-Pino.
Aye.
Commissioner Lucia.
Aye.
And Commissioner Schwartz.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
I think you forgot me, but Dan.
Oh,
Aye.
sorry, Commissioner Martin. Thank you. Yes, motion passes 8-0.
Great, thanks, Dan. The next item on the agenda is item number 3, commercial parking UDC text amendment. Would staff please provide their presentation for item number 3 regarding the commercial parking UDC text amendments?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Evening Commission and everyone here. My name is Acacia Dupierre. I'm a lead planner with the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services. I'll be presenting item 3, commercial parking requirements, a proposed UDC text amendment addressing electric vehicle readiness and individual parking plan application qualifications. So I'll do a summary of the proposed amendment up front, and then we'll go through some of the background on each piece. The proposed amendment consists of 2 parts. That new multifamily commercial and retail development will require specific minimum levels of EV charging infrastructure readiness based on their use. And incentives are available for providing more than the minimum. Multifamily development would require a total of 25% of parking spaces to have access to EV infrastructure. And that would be a mix of ready-to-use outlets and conduit for future upgrades. Commercial office parking spaces would require 20% of spaces to be within reach of charging infrastructure. And an update from the last time we presented, retail development that has more than 100 parking spaces would require that 10% of those spaces have access to charging infrastructure. Half of those should have access to a charging station. This might have gotten looked over in previous materials, but just to point out that these requirements are meant for new development or existing expansion thresholds in the UDC, since a main component of their justification is the cost savings at construction over more expensive retrofits. The second piece in amending the same section of the UDC is to broaden the eligible use of an individual parking plan application, allowing flexible but site-specifically vetted parking reductions for affordable housing development, as well as bars and restaurants. So just to back up a little bit, the section of the UDC that this amendment applies to is section 7.4, which covers motor vehicle and bicycle parking. This section of the code lays out the minimum number of different parking spaces for different land uses, as well as design criteria and any reductions or exceptions. So related to that last point, a tool for reductions is covered here called an individual parking plan application. So this entire amendment covers these areas in part because they're related to a number of similar initiatives. We've presented them together in 2 public meetings as such, related to the city's climate change action response, ongoing support for local businesses, and goals for high quality public outdoor spaces. But also mainly they are components of the same section of code. So the first part of this proposed amendment is regarding EV readiness, and the main guidance for this initiative is the EV roadmap adopted by Mayor and Council in April 2021. This roadmap includes a whole range of short, mid, and long-term strategies to prepare Tucson for, and where possible, accelerate the shift to electric vehicles. In June 2021, Mayor and Council voted 7-0 to direct staff to initiate the process of amending the necessary codes to require EV charging for multifamily residential and commercial development. So what we're talking about here is just one piece of this plan, while other city departments are focused where they can on public fleets and facilities, incentives, and other programs that are outside of development requirement we're discussing today. So how do we predict the rate that drivers in Tucson will switch over to EVs? We might not be able to pinpoint that exactly, but there are a number of trends that support some kind of required readiness. The rate of technological advances and investment in EVs means that the number of models available in the next few years will more than double. The type of models available are likely to appeal to wider ranges of drivers. It's not just Prius and Tesla, but Ford trucks are part of the lineup. And with longer range capabilities, range anxiety will be less of an issue. What is a particularly pressing issue is that at least 6 major automakers have pledged to phase out new gas and diesel vehicles in the next 15 years. And others who haven't promised that are investing heavily in EVs. So there may be a near point in time where the value of conventional vehicles drops considerably, while their upkeep becomes very costly, especially compared to their electric counterparts. There's concern that without some proactivity, that jurisdictions could be left to play expensive catch-up as we see this transition play out in real time. So we do have some understanding of the current EV adoption numbers in the Tucson area. If we include zip codes that are within a 1-hour drive of Tucson, about 1 in every 300 vehicles registered is an electric vehicle. So this map shows that the concentration of those EVs are in some of the low density residential communities in the north. For example, in the Catalina foothills, 1% of registered vehicles are electric. And comparing that to the national EV share that has hovered around 2% for the last few years. And something to keep in mind is that the EV roadmap supports equitable access to EV resources and infrastructure and the benefits that come with that. So while currently it's likely that higher income areas and families have access to both new vehicles and the means to charge them, but as EVs become more available, more affordable, access to places to charge them should also be available and affordable. So that's why including charging at apartment buildings and publicly accessible places like commercial areas is an important balance to consider. So with this in mind, site-specific patterns and habits have helped inform the proposal. We know that more than 80% of EV drivers charge their cars at home, and this makes a lot of sense because it requires no waiting time, no detours. It's gentler on the battery than high-speed charging. It's really similar to plugging your phone in overnight, habit-wise. But about half of people don't have access to a dedicated off-street parking space for overnight or low-cost EV charging, compared to single-family homes where EV drivers can install their own infrastructure. So that informs our focus on multifamily buildings. Workplaces offer a good secondary place to charge during a work shift. That's another option for those without overnight access. And then public charging sites help fill in remaining gaps in charging opportunities, especially if they're located where people will park for a significant amount of time. And just a review of the types of readiness possible, going from left to right here on the screen, from low to high in cost, of course, and how actually ready these options are upon construction. EV capable here is the lowest requirement, essentially saying that some spaces need to be pre-wired, but ready for upgrade in the future. It's the cheapest now, but saves someone from coming back and trenching the ground to add wires later. This is where the most cost savings come into play. Note that the cost to pre-wire new construction should be compared to the cost of a retrofit, rather than avoiding the cost of this kind of equipment altogether. And retrofits are on average 300% more expensive. EV ready is the next level up. And it's just that, saying that in addition to the wiring, a usable outlet is installed during construction. It costs a little more than just the wires, and it's ready to use, likely with the driver's own charging cord. And at the far end of the spectrum, the EV charging stations are the most expensive, sort of ready plus, where an actual charging station is installed during construction, either wall mounted or stanchion style, that allows for payment and metering and a few more functions in addition to just the outlet on its own. So with all this background in mind, combined with peer city case studies that we referenced, we've landed on a proposal that balances all of these goals, ensuring equitable access to the environmental and cost-saving benefits of EVs, saving significant retrofitting costs by requiring just a baseline minimum in new construction now that is ready to use and easier to upgrade infrastructure that's not mired in the highest costing materials. So that leads us to this proposal. And just to say again, these requirements are for new development only, or where an existing development expansion threshold triggers similar upgrades found in the UDC. So first, in multifamily, since home charging will be the most useful, a total of 25% minimum of new development parking spaces will require EV infrastructure. This is made up of 15% of spaces with access to conduit for a future upgrade and 10% ready with outlets. More expensive stations aren't required here, since there may be flexibility in managing residents' regular patterns of charging. The developer or the owner can opt to incorporate the charging cost into rent or into parking fees, or they can add a charging station if preferred, which would allow for reduction incentives in this proposal. In commercial use, sort of the next best place to provide realistic charging during a work shift, a 20% minimum of spaces in new development would require readiness. So that's made up of 15% of spaces accessible by conduit for future upgrade and 5% with ready-to-use outlets. Again, with regular visitors and work shift patterns, site owners can decide how to manage access and fees, or even provide charging as an incentive to their workers. But they can always add more and include stations if that's a preferred management system. And then in retail, where long dwell times would be a good opportunity to top up charging, 10% minimum of spaces require EV readiness. That's 5% able to access a charging station, and 5% should be within reach of outlets. So this approach is a bit different because of the likelihood of kind of your non-daily visitors. Station interfaces make more sense here. And then again, an update from the last time we presented. Now the proposal is that in retail use, only developments with 100 or more spaces are subject to these requirements. This is in response to Planning Commission feedback and the likelihood that larger retail will have those longer dwell times. And the most expensive requirements are not a large burden on smaller standalone businesses. Just to say again, incentives are provided in each use category in multifamily and commercial settings. Any additional outlets or, additional outlets or stations above the requirements allows a 1-for-1 space reduction. In retail use, the incentive is 2 less spaces for every additional station. And in all situations, it's capped at a 30% reduction of the starting lot size. And then here, just to illustrate some estimated costs and how the incentives trade-off would work. Here in the multifamily scenario, the requirements for a range of lot sizes are shown on the left of the screen. The costs are shown per space before any reimbursement programs, also before potential transformer upgrades. They're also in addition to typical parking lot costs, which are noted below. Those can range from $5,000 to $10,000 for surface lots and significantly higher in structured parking. So in larger lots, here, an example of 100 lots, 100 space lot is shown, taking into account the mix of required conduit and outlets. The estimated cost per space is $90 to $180. And then on the right, you can see the potential reductions for extra outlets. The estimated cost per space here goes up to $280, but the opportunity may be there to reduce the total lot size up to 30% less, resulting in some overall cost savings. So in multifamily lots of 50 spaces, the cost ranges 110 to 230 per space with the requirements, and lots of 10 spaces, the estimate ranges from 100 to 250 per space. Very similarly, in the commercial use setting, the required percentages are a little less, but the reduction incentive is similar. Just to give the examples quickly, in lots of 100 spaces, the cost range is 80 to 160 per space. And as it's expected in lots of 50 spaces, the scale cost increases a bit from 100 to 200. And in lots of 10 spaces, it's estimated 90 to 220. And then here in retail use, the smaller development sizes aren't being shown because of the update to the proposal. And the cost estimates range from 110 to 270 per space for what's required. And the incentive for each additional charging station is to reduce the required spaces by 2. So changing that range of cost is 120 to 550 per space, with the possibility for those reduced number of spaces overall. So other considerations are, of course, accessibility. An EV ADA standard reference from the International Building Code is that 4%, but no less than 1 EV charging space per lot must be accessibly compliant with dimensions and charging infrastructure cited accordingly. That 4% is not part of the lot's total ADA requirement, but allows for ADA access to a percentage of the EV charging spaces. Additionally, guidelines are recommended regarding standardized signage and wayfinding, as well as safe, visible, and efficient design. And then if it's helpful, I'll pause here for any questions or discussion from the commission about the EV portion before moving on to the next section.
Do any commissioners have questions for staff regarding the EV charging station or EV readiness requirements here?
I actually had a quick question.
Go ahead, Commissioner
In-
Ortiz-Pino.
Thank you. In the presentation, you mentioned that there's opportunities for businesses to recoup costs on their charging stations or they're adding the infrastructure. Is that by way of like adding an additional charge to the baseline energy that they're providing? And like how would a customer purchase that energy from the charging station, and how is that kind of charged?
Sure. So the reimbursements I referenced are, for example, what TEP currently offers. They have a range of programs. I think it's different in commercial or residential settings. I can't comment too much in detail on that. That's subject to their own programs. There are also federal programs for reimbursements, is my understanding. As far as what sites charge for the use of the charging equipment, that we've tried to leave that really flexible and open to be decided upon by the site, how they want to manage that. The difference between packaging that in existing parking costs or with rent in terms of the multifamily setting, or however they want to set that up.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go for it, Commissioner Cassidy.
Thanks. One of the letters from the public asked a question about how these numbers were arrived at as far as the percentages of each type of readiness that's being required, and how do you know those are the right numbers to use? Can you address that?
Sure. So part of our research was looking at peer cities. We looked at a range of cities that have implemented similar requirements. So on one end of the scale would be somewhere like San Jose, California, where they've got adoption rates of 20% EV ownership. And their requirements kind of line up with that. They have 50% required EV readiness in non-residential locations and up to 100% required in their multifamily and hotel settings. We acknowledge that we are not at 20% EV ownership, and so we are not matching that kind of requirement. Somewhere that we are more similar to is Salt Lake City, maybe aspiring to their current EV ownership of 2.5%. In speaking to them and learning about their process, they had a lot of similar concerns from their stakeholders. One thing that did come out of it was they wish they had started higher than where they landed because of how people have responded. But in any case, their requirement is 25% of EV readiness in multifamily. And in that example, it does require those EV stations. And so we've tweaked that a little bit in our proposal to just require the less expensive outlets and conduit.
Thank you. And I've got a follow-up question to that, if I may. I'm curious what the response has been on this from the business community.
We know that currently the EV incentive for reductions isn't used as it's currently in the code. We've got more response from the development community that have concern about added costs to their projects.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff? Hearing none, I have a few, and thanks Commissioner Cassidy for asking those questions, because those were two on my list to ask. But furthering those questions, can staff expound upon some of, how we are anticipating monitoring these systems, or, how are, I guess the question for you that I'm curious to learn more about is, what type of mechanisms are we considering to ensure that our readiness does not outpace our demand, if you will? So if, EV charge or owners of electric vehicles aren't quite as, they're not purchasing them or making that transition as we're anticipating and projecting based on trends, how are we, going to address that so we are going to have, more EV charging stations, if you will, than necessary?
So this is something that we will set up to track if it is passed. It's something that we can continue to monitor and, if requested, review in a year or two to see if what's been proposed is matched up to the demand. It is a difficult thing to get exactly right, but there's a bit of pressure to try to be proactive about it.
Great.
Just to add to that a little bit, Chair Willett, yes, this is, I think that this is viewed by the city as something that we know will be a little bit the leading edge of technology. And so there is, as Acacia mentioned, kind of this, the technology is not going to be, or the code is probably not going to be perfect in terms of the adoption rate. It's very hard to get that exactly in sync, but what we're trying to do is create more of an abundance of EV charging to really accelerate EV adoption and make it very convenient and easy for Tucson residents to switch to EV should they choose to. And Acacia mentioned this, but just to highlight that this is one component of a larger EV roadmap and framework for the city that will also include right-of-way charging and other EV infrastructure. So this is kind of addressing the private sites and private development, but there's other components to, kind of spur a broader rollout of EV infrastructure at the same time.
Great, thank you, Corin, for adding to that, and thank you, Acacia. So if there are no other questions, then Acacia, if you'd like to continue on in the next portion of your presentation, that'd be great.
Sure, thank you. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate the questions. We'll now shift focus to the next piece of this amendment, which is an update to the individual parking plan application. There's a fair amount of background context, but it comes in specific response to at least two recent initiatives. The COVID response program allowing expanded outdoor seating for bars and restaurants, and the housing crisis response, housing affordability strategy of Tucson, also known as HAST. So something that's really important to clarify about the IPP, the individual parking plan, is that it's an application-based program. There are qualifications to even apply, and then there's review, analysis, maybe even some back and forth before a decision is made. It's not a blanket parking reduction upon application. Of course, currently if a development is located in certain districts in the city, the infill incentive district or the Sunshine Mile overlay district, for example, that type of zoning allows for parking reductions with certain standards. But for locations outside of those areas, a separate application like the IPP might be used. So in the UDC, it lists what types of existing and new developments can apply to reduce the number of parking spaces on their site. Mixed use, proximity to transit, sites where space or time of use lend themselves to shared agreements, for example, religious uses. Currently, affordable housing on its own is not an eligible qualification, and restaurants and bars are not allowed to apply unless they are part of mixed use. So when multifamily housing requires on-site parking in a surface lot or a garage, it typically uses a substantial portion of the lot. It can be a significant piece of the project cost. We've already talked a lot about parking costs today. And currently, while residential care services or housing developments for the elderly or people with physical disabilities are eligible for reduced parking through the IPP, other forms of affordable housing are not. So this proposal comes from outreach conducted through Housing and Community Development HAST process, and ultimately from mayor and council direction when that plan was adopted, that allowing affordable housing to apply to reduce their parking requirements would help mitigate those development costs, making affordable housing, especially on constrained infill sites, more financially viable. Since then, this amendment has been presented back to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, where it was supported and also encouraged that a future consideration would be for affordable housing to be eligible for reductions as of right through updated studies. So for bars and restaurants, the current IPP restriction was put in place over 10 years ago. So revisiting this item after a decade's worth of changing factors is warranted, including that allowing restaurants and bars to apply comes as part of business support and health and safety measures in response to COVID. Bars and restaurants that have options to expand into the right of way, either the sidewalk or the street along the curb, are a bit different than the focus here. What we're talking about is when bars and restaurants are better sited to expand outdoor seating on their private property, most often in the parking lot. So the temporary program that's allowed bars and restaurants to apply for outdoor seating because of relaxed zoning and parking restrictions will end at the beginning of next year. This map shows the location of 47 of those temporary participants. So when that temporary program ends, it's estimated that a substantial amount of businesses won't be able to maintain, or additional businesses will have trouble applying for that outdoor seating because of the high parking requirements for bars and restaurants. Without considering site context or location, bars require 1 parking space for every 50 feet of gross floor area, and restaurants require 1 space for every 100 square feet. And then for reference, other commercial services require 1 space for every 300 square feet. So we've been gathering feedback through a number of channels, convening a stakeholders group with input from ward offices and people who have been using the program. We held 2 public meetings in fall of last year, publicized through the PDSD newsletter, through the stakeholder group, and through ward offices. A restaurant survey was sent through the program participants and the stakeholder group. And this hearing, of course, was noticed through the standard legal ad, as well as an additional mailing to all currently registered neighborhood associations. So some of the feedback on outdoor seating that's been allowed so far is that it supports businesses and concerned customers. Besides the economic benefit of more seats instead of cars, it's been pointed out that high parking requirements at bars encourages drinking and driving. And in response to questions about the best time of year for these arrangements, we've heard that most businesses see the benefit of year-round outdoor seating. Large parking requirements have also prevented restaurants and cafes from occupying existing, often historic structures. So that's a common constraint on older sites, and opening up the IPP would support that reuse. Something that we've heard, there's been some concerns about potential overflow parking into residential streets, that it's a nuisance and a safety concern. It might be helpful to know that in a review of the temporary expansions, there have been no complaints about parking. There's actually haven't been complaints recorded about parking for any of the IPPs that have been approved in the city. There were repeated requests to prioritize sidewalk accessibility and ADA standards, and I'll cover that portion of it in a minute. The piece that we want to highlight again is that the IPP already includes neighborhood notification as well as a meeting. It includes parking analysis and the ability to add site-specific conditions to deal with concerns such as noise. And I think it's worth noting that other existing options for reductions in parking are as of right and don't require neighborhood notification, but the IPP leaves that requirement in place. So I've covered a lot of this, but there are a lot of components to the individual parking plan to protect neighboring sites from any adverse consequences of it. As I said, the reduction proposal is an application. It's site specific. It requires notification and a neighborhood meeting if it's within 300 feet of residential zones. The PDSD director approves or denies parking reductions based on findings that come from a proposed parking configuration that doesn't reduce any ADA spaces. The application has to include traffic counts and a circulation study. It must identify other modes of transportation. And as I said, in notification to adjacent neighborhoods and in a meeting, they need to show that noise and light will be minimized, that vehicle access in a neighborhood will be deterred, and that neighborhood parking will be prevented. Just a few notes on outdoor seating design. That's guided by the streetery and parklet program, but outdoor seating must not remove any ADA parking either. It shouldn't remove any bike parking. It can't create light intrusion into a residential area. It needs to locate seating more than 100 feet from residential properties, and speakers need to be even further than that. It needs to be safely sited away from parked vehicles and moving vehicles. And it should be reviewed by Tucson Fire if tents or shade coverings are included. And of course, it must adhere to liquor license and control regulations if applicable. So expanding the IPP application would incentivize and increase the feasibility of affordable housing. It would support more sustainable adaptive reuse projects. It would add to public space and walkable neighborhoods and maintain business support with room for health and safety standards. Items for future consideration, we've touched on a little bit, but it includes a more in-depth review of parking requirements for affordable housing by examining the demand for parking in those types of projects. It might be possible to identify a more appropriate parking ratio. And then also liquor mitigation plan requirements that exist now have really restrictive timelines on the local application process compared to the state. So it may be worthwhile to review the usefulness of that current requirement. Okay, so just to summarize the proposed amendment here, that new multifamily commercial and retail development would require specific minimum levels of EV charging based on their use, and incentives are available for providing more than the minimum. And the second part of this amendment is to widen the use of the individual parking plan application. There has been some concern raised that although these items are related in the code, that there might be some confusion in discussing them together. So we'd just like to get feedback here regarding any remaining confusion. If we can answer any questions about either section, happy to provide any clarification.
Great, thank you, Acacia, for that presentation, super helpful. If I can now open this up for any questions from the commission related to the information presented by staff, and I just really want to make sure that we're all clear on what is being asked of us. So if there are any confusion or is any confusion or items that we'd like to discuss, let's take the time to get those questions asked now. Chuck, I see your hand up.
Lexi, this is Chuck.
Go for it.
I had a couple questions. I was looking at the bus routes and it looks like 1,320 feet from a transit stop allows almost every project in the middle of the city to use the IPP because it is such a long distance, and buses are almost every half mile, so there's just small portions of the center and sections that are not affected. So looks like this could be used by just about anybody on commercial streets or on the arterials and collectors. The second question is, can you do both the EV reduction and the IPP? Thank you.
Yes, I don't believe there are any restrictions on applying for both programs. The upper limit of reductions through the EV requirements is capped at 30%.
Yeah, so Commissioner Martin, the way it would work essentially related to that is that you would calculate the number of EV spaces based on whatever that number is after those initial reductions. And then, you'd be whatever that number is, and then your additional incentive would come out of that, but it wouldn't calculate the EV spaces off of that. So you'd do the IPP and then calculate the EV spaces off of whatever that number is.
I think that could be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Any other questions for staff? Because I have some if no one else has any. Alrighty, well, not hearing anyone. So I read some of the letters that we received from the public and just have some questions regarding the public outreach for the affordable housing component. So Acacia, would you mind just reiterating the public outreach and stakeholder meetings that the city had regarding the affordable housing reductions in the IPP? And then also just reiterate what type of public notification process is required as a result of, when the IPP is utilized. That'd be great.
Sure. So the affordable housing component came out of the HAS plan, which was developed by Housing and Community Development. Members of our team were coordinating with that throughout, but I can summarize that the plan was developed based on input from the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. In addition, HCD held a few public meetings in October of last year with focused breakout sessions to discuss the strategies in the plan. That outreach is all documented on their public engagement webpage. We can certainly share that if that's helpful. But even more recently, specifics on this complete amendment were presented to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing a few weeks ago. Their feedback was they supported the eligibility of affordable housing for the IPP, but they are interested in those future considerations where additional data might support a updated required ratio of parking for affordable housing or a reduction just as of right without the application. And then the second part of your question, if a site is within 300 feet of residential zones R1, R2, R3, they are required to notify property owners in that threshold of their plan and to hold a meeting that they're all invited to where they pretty much show the materials that go into the application, existing and proposed plans, the traffic counts and circulation, and what they're doing to deter neighborhood traffic impacts and deter the potential for parking in those adjacent neighborhoods.
Great, thank you. Thank you for reading those. This is more of a question for the commission here. Just in regards to the outreach that has been performed for affordable housing, do you all feel that it is appropriate for the request that's being presented?
I think I had a question last time. This is Chuck. What is considered low income housing? What's the qualifier for the IPP?
Sure. So that is a component of the amendment, is to add that definition to the UDC, and low income housing would be where it's less than 80% of AMI.
Okay. Well, by hearing nothing, I'm going to assume there that the answer to my question was yes, you guys feel it was appropriate. And I tend to agree with that, and that it seems like the process is typical to the efforts that staff puts forth. So without hearing any other questions for staff, it's time to open the public hearing. So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing to members of the public who would like to speak about this item to the commission. In general, speakers have 3 to 5 minutes to speak, which may be extended depending on the number of speakers, etc. At this time, I have 2 speakers who have notified staff that they'd like to speak, and then I see an additional hand. So I'm going to start with those who have submitted requests to staff, and then we'll move on to the folks in the audience wishing to speak. So again, we have 3 to 5 minutes to present your information, and we'll go ahead and start with Ms. Karen Potter.
I'm sorry, this is Bambi with the clerk's office. Before you start, I think you do have to motion to go into the public hearing, and then your speakers can then go, and then if there's nothing done after that, then you've got a motion to end the public hearing.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, Bambi. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing before we invite Ms. Potter up to speak?
So moved.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Do we have to do a roll call here?
Well, I don't believe so, not for.
Okay, perfect. Then Ms. Potter, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Karen Potter, and I'm the Utility Program Manager for the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, otherwise known as SWEEP. And we're a regional public interest organization focused on eliminating waste from the power generation and transportation systems in order to save all Arizonans money. SWEEP appreciates the opportunity to provide comments tonight in support of staff's proposal to adopt the EV readiness provisions as a part of the commercial parking UDC text amendment. Increased use of EVs will spur economic development, improve air quality, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. To realize these benefits, the City of Tucson must invest in that EV infrastructure so that EV charging is readily available to all residents. Approving the EV-ready building code is critical for ensuring the equitable and accessible deployment of EV charging equipment. With these benefits in mind, SWEEP believes that these code provisions before you today are the best option for Tucson residents and for Tucson businesses. It is critical that we move forward with this EV readiness in this cycle to ensure that the City of Tucson is adequately prepared to meet the growing need of EV charging. Arizona's current market share is over 4.3% of electric vehicles registered, making it 12th in the nation for EV growth. Not including EV infrastructure during this new construction phase, as we're reviewing this for these building types, is going to force consumers and businesses eventually to pay a significantly higher cost to retrofit their homes and their buildings and other types of businesses at a later date. In particular, it's about 6 times more expensive to retrofit a multifamily or commercial parking space with EV charging infrastructure than it is to install the equipment during the new construction phase. With these requirements in the code, we'll be forcing, without these requirements in the code, we'll be forcing significant costs onto these residents and these businesses that could have been avoided by including the EV infrastructure during the original construction phase. And for all of these reasons, SWEEP urges the Planning Commission to recommend approval of this EV readiness requirement for new multifamily and commercial developments. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks for that, Ms. Potter. Are there any questions for Karen from the commission? Hearing none, thank you so much, Ms. Potter, for joining us this evening. We appreciate your comments. Moving on to the next speaker I have listed here, Ms. Allison Salmon. You have the floor if you're present.
Good evening. Thank you, Honorable Madam Chair and Commissioners. I would like to start off by complimenting staff on the work that they've done. And I know that this hasn't been an easy policy to put in place. As a member of the stakeholder committee, we were very well aware of the fact that there was not much data to glean, especially in other cities in Arizona. But given that, I do feel that that has had a negative impact on our ability to assess what the threshold should be for this. While Metropolitan Pima Alliance does support EV readiness, and we do believe that it is going to be in the community's best interest long-term to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road, we do have concerns about the peer cities that were used to get the percentage that Commissioner Cassidy did call into question. I understand that we want to be progressive as a community. And while this is going to increase costs, the concern is not merely increasing the costs. The concern is increasing the costs to a point that's not necessary. Generally, I do believe that while this policy is good meaning, it is a little bit aggressive for what is currently necessary and what we could expect to see for growth. Even the growth projections seem to be a little bit high, given that we are well under the national average. So I would just ask that the commission reconsider some of these percentages, especially as they relate to commercial and multifamily. The other question I had is in regards to the different use categories. As you dig down a little bit more, instead of just kind of being in broad-based retail, commercial, and multifamily, is where those different percentages were gotten in terms of what was allocated to conduit versus outlet versus stations. And so some additional clarification information in that would be helpful. The other piece I would potentially like to have a little bit more clarification on as a stakeholder as well is, a little bit more assessment of the permits that were granted in the last few years and just how many different stations, outlets, and conduits this would result in for the city based upon the proposed for each of the 3 retail, commercial, multifamily categories. I understand that it's never ideal to have a really lengthy stakeholder process. However, I do feel like there is some outstanding information that hasn't been analyzed, and I do feel like there's the opportunity to do a little bit more fine tuning on the percentages and the mathematics based upon more of the peer cities closer to home, like Phoenix and even Flagstaff, where this has actually been implemented, instead of San Jose, where unfortunately the economics is in grave disparity to our own community. Again, though, I do really appreciate the work that staff has done. I appreciate being involved in the stakeholder community, and I do want to be sure to clarify that this is not in opposition of EV readiness whatsoever. This is just making sure that it does stay equitable, and part of being equitable is making sure that it's achievable for all, not just the end user. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salmon, for your comments there. Does any members of the commission have any questions for Ms. Salmon? Perfect, hearing none. We'll move on to the next speaker who I see his hand raised. Mr. Belichick, you've got 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lexi.
So my name is Robert Vulacek. I am a local energy efficiency consultant and member of the Tucson Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability. I'd like to correct one item. Arizona is in the top 10. We're currently placed 7th in the number of EVs that have been adopted already. And kind of the points I wanted to emphasize is that the greatest need is for low cost 120 volt, 240 outlets at the parking spaces where people are already parked. There's often way too much emphasis on high powered or expensive network chargers. And, that's often just not practical, especially if you're a low income person trying to do public charging. You're paying 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much per kilowatt hour. So, what we need is a lot of very simple outlets in lots of parking places. And there's just a lot of cost savings to be had by getting this stuff in during construction. I'm not sure what the typical lifetime of a parking lot is. I've got to guess it's at least 10 years. And during that time, we're going to see significant changes in the mix of new car sales. There's a lot of European countries that are already over 20% of new car sales. In fact, currently in Norway, it's over 90%. And the accounting firm KPMG recently did actually it was August 2021, did a study of 1,118 auto executives, and their consensus estimate that by the year 2030, 1/2 of the United States car sales will be electric. So that's just 8 years from now. There's going to be a substantial need, and pretty much you guys talked about percentages, and the argument I'm making is that whatever percentage you pick for each category is not going to be nearly enough. Within the lifetime of any new parking lot, we're going to see a substantial increase in the number of cars looking for a place to charge. If you're at all familiar with the work of Harvard professor Clayton Christensen in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, what he has found is that once market share reaches about 20%, things really take off and rapidly go to 80%. Think of, DVD players and smartphones and all that kind of stuff, and the trajectory that they did. So we're right, at the cusp of a major shift in transportation technology and the attendant cost savings from the far lower cost of energy for electric cars and the much greater efficiency. So if we're going to give access to that kind of cost savings to the lower income community, we need those multifamily and workplace charging opportunities, something simple and convenient. And I'm encouraging you to put in the infrastructure. At a minimum, we're going to need a whole lot more conduit, and the projections are that it's just going to be a significant change in the next 10 years. And I've been driving EVs for 7 years. I haven't bought any gasoline in 7 years, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has about EVs and the problems that we face, which frankly, if you're a homeowner and you can charge off of an outlet overnight, it's not that hard. But I rent out my electric car on a service called Turo. So I'm frequently dealing with people who are renting one for the weekend or whatever, who are apartment dwellers. And, they just struggle to find a place to charge it because they can't do it.
30 seconds there, Robert, to finish up your thoughts.
That's what I've got. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your comments there. Does anybody have questions for Robert here this evening from the commission? Great, hearing none. Thank you for joining us this evening, Mr. Belichick. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak on this item? Indicate by speaking. Okay, well, hearing none, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that motion.
So it looks like we've got a motion from Commissioner Martin and a second by Commissioner Gast. Do we need to do a roll call here? Sorry, I'm still learning the process here, Bambi. No roll call, perfect. So then now that the public hearing is closed and it's seconded, can I get an aye to move on?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Great, I think that was everybody. Aye, I guess I didn't say aye, so that would be me, aye. Very good. So moving on, I'd like to open this up for general discussion by the commission on the proposed amendment here. What's the pleasure of the commission? Dan?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to let you all know, we had received one additional letter and comment related to this. It ended up going into one of my other folders and I didn't see it when it was submitted. I did email that to you and it has been posted online in case you wanted to incorporate that into your decision-making process. Thank you.
Then, excuse me, sorry, Dan, maybe you can just share the letter, who it was from and whether it was in support.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I apologize. It was from Living Streets Alliance, and it was in support of the parking amendments. Yes.
Okay, great. Commissioner Martin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my digital hand, so I looked at all the buttons, but nothing seemed to work. I think the only concern I have is the IPP reduction and the EV reduction. I think the last 2 years have been a little different than, well, they have been different. And my concern is that too much reduction in parking is going to be hard on neighborhoods, and the fact that it's only 1,320 feet away means just about any facility on a arterial or collector street can apply for an IPP. So that's my concern.
Commissioner Cassidy, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up real quick and it went right back down.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I didn't click the button long enough. I wanted to echo Commissioner Martin's thoughts on the IPP reduction. I'm generally supportive of that IPP for the low-income housing. And I also am generally supportive of the EV readiness changes, but I'm more hesitant on opening up that IPP to the restaurants and bars. And I'm curious as to what the other commissioners think about that.
I can, for discussion purposes. Oh, Chris Ortiz-Pino, if you want to go ahead, you have your hand up, and then I can insert myself.
Sure. I actually clapped, but I meant to raise my hand. I think it's an interesting question between, like, I think the IPP is a pretty maybe it's not arduous, but it is a pretty involved process that I think gets quite a bit of scrutiny, and it is, you know, looked at on a case by case basis. So I don't know if opening it up to such a wide audience is dangerous. I share your preoccupation and your worry about what it could be, but I don't know. I feel like the process itself is pretty arduous, and there's a pretty good track record Planning and Development Services has in addressing those issues with no complaints. So I don't know. That's just kind of where I'm coming from at this point.
Commissioner Schwartz, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to sort of echo that sentiment, and just thinking through like how many parking spaces we really are talking about losing with seating. I don't know that it's even that big of a change if a restaurant is able to go through the very scrutinized process. I think this sort of incremental change is not a by right amendment, and there's still the security plan and neighborhood notification, all these things that have to occur, as well as the noise ordinance rules that still apply here. So I do think that, 2.5 years into this pandemic, maybe we need to start considering what's happening now as normal or some version of it. And I think that considering the ordinances that came to us as an adjustment to the things that have happened in the past 2 years have also shown a lot of people, proven concepts to a lot of people that things like increased outdoor seating or activating, more public space are things that are important to lives in cities. Yeah, so I am in favor, essentially.
Great, thank you for that. And if I may add, I also echo a similar sentiment as Commissioners Schwartz and Ortiz-Pino in that this is the IPP process, having utilizing it often in my job. It is a very scrutinized process and is involved with staff and is involved with the neighbors. And so I trust in the city's process that they're looking out for the best interests as far as the neighborhoods go. And I too am in support of the amendment here. But something I think that since this is one lumped motion, and it might help address some of the concerns that have been expressed in regards to the IPP changes as well as the EV charging stations, is perhaps as a commission we recommend that we adopt these amendments for approval within a reevaluation period that asks staff to go back and look at the metric for EV charging station as well as any impacts on the IPP process, and have them look at how these changes are affecting process, perhaps in like a year or 18 months, something out in the future, because some of these things we just simply don't know how they're going to react, and how they're going to be implemented, if you will. And so I think we've got to trust in the city's process and know that they've implemented it and it's worked in the past on these things, with some recommendation that they reevaluate after some time has passed to ensure that these modifications aren't in fact creating detrimental effects on neighborhoods, etc. Does anybody else have any thoughts or what have you? Commissioner Ortiz-Pino?
Yeah, I think I want to discuss the issue of adding affordable housing as a qualifying development to utilize the IPP. I think it's a step in the right direction. I fear that it is a costly and time-consuming, burdensome process for developments to utilize. They're obviously trying to find cost savings in reducing their parking requirements, and by adding, adding EV spaces or EV ready spaces, that's great. And I think it's looking towards the future. But I think, any motion tonight, I would want to potentially add the recommendation that to mayor and council that they direct planning staff to find or to study further by right reductions in affordable housing parking requirements. I just wanted to kind of see how everybody felt about that.
Commissioner Cassidy, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I just want to state my support for the recommendation that you made, Chair Willett, and also for the recommendation that Commissioner Ortiz-Pino made, both to re-review the parking mandate for affordable housing projects and to take a look at both of these items again in a year or 2 years, make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences.
Great, thank you for that. Any other discussion? Oh, Dan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just related to kind of Commissioner Martin's concern about reductions all within, I guess it's a quarter mile or something of that sort. I just wanted to make clear that this is a site-specific process for the individual parking plan, and that's not just a by right reduction. So as it is, we only get about 4 or 5 of these a year. I don't, foresee this being many more by opening up for bars and restaurants, but it does have to go through that full process in order to get that reduction for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. There is no further discussion. Can I entertain a motion? Commissioner Ortiz-Pino?
I would like to make a motion to recommend the amendments proposed tonight to the UDC and the IPP as written, with the inclusion of a monitoring component that you mentioned. And I would further like to recommend that mayor and council direct planning staff to study further by right reductions to parking requirements for affordable housing development.
I'll second that.
So I have a motion and a second on that. Can I get all those in favor of recommending this item to mayor and council with the the amendment there presented by Commissioner Ortiz-Pino? If we're all in favor with that, can I all in favor of the recommending that item, sorry, to mayor and council, can I get an A?
Aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. All righty, hearing nothing there, can I get a roll call, please?
Sure. Yes, Commissioner Martin,
Aye.
Commissioner Gast,
Aye.
Commissioner Cassidy,
Aye.
Commissioner Pafford,
Aye.
Commissioner Willett, or Chair Willett, sorry.
Aye, thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz-Pino,
Aye.
Commissioner Lucia,
Aye.
and Commissioner Schwartz.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
Awesome. So the next item on the agenda is staff announcements. Would staff please provide any updates to the commission?
I don't believe we have any updates tonight, although there's a few items on the future agenda items that are both kind of action items as well as some more informational items that we wanted to bring to the commission over the next few months to kind of inform some of these larger discussions. And I think are very related to this discussion tonight. One thing we wanted to bring to the commission in the next month or two is to have a presentation from Housing and Community Development on the housing affordability plan. as there's several recommendations in that plan that touch on future zoning changes and kind of larger planning goals for Tucson. We wanted to bring that to the commission and provide a briefing.
Great, thank you, Corin, for that. So that looks like that segued perfectly into item number 5, which was future agenda items. So with that, the next item on the agenda is call to the audience. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission this evening? If so, please indicate by speaking. Well, very good. Hearing nothing there. The next item on the agenda is adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Great. We've got a motion and a second. So with all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Well, very good. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. We appreciate your attendance, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.